Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Marisa Kazem, and today I'm going to be doing a video that you guys have been requesting from me for so long, which is a watercolor tutorial on bullet journal paper. I decided to paint Ariel for this tutorial. I wanted to paint something that allowed me to do different color variations, skin tone, highlights and shadows, and maybe a little bit of very wet paper as well, because I know that's the biggest question I get from you guys, which is how do you make the paper so wet, use so much water, and it ends up being fine? So that's what we're going to do today. I forgot to say when I started this video, I'm planning on letting one of you guys bid for this painting on eBay. I don't need to keep this painting, and I specifically wanted it to be for you guys. So if you like this and you want to cut it out and stick it in your own journal or keep it for whatever reason, I'm going to have this linked on my eBay. I'll leave the link down below and you guys can bid on it. I'm gonna have the bidding for like 5 days, I think. And one of you guys gets to have one of my paintings. And I've never done this before and I think it'll be really exciting. So definitely check the link in the description box. So the biggest question I get from you guys is, how do I stop the paper from curling or bending or whatever? And I just want to show you guys that I don't. My papers are still very wrinkled. So this is my old bullet journal, and you can see there is so much wrinkling happening, especially paintings that are bigger. There's like, look at the way this curves. There's just a lot of wrinkling in my journal. But I try my best to keep it looking, you know, nice, and I'm just going to show you how I do that. This is what I use. I'm sure you guys have seen these in my videos. They're just clips. I got these from, I think, Kohl's because they were gold and I wanted them because they were cute. But any kind of clips will do, and I just clip my paper in place. This is an Archer and Olive notepad, by the way, and it's still regular bullet journal paper, and I thought it'd just be easier to show you on this. So when I grab pages, I will grab like a thick enough chunk. So I'm not even counting. I don't know how many pages that is, but I'm just gonna clip it in place. And then a lot of the time I'll clip the top and bottom of the page too. Okay, so now that we have a million clips in place, we can get started. I have my water right here. You can't really see it on camera, but I'm just gonna dip the paintbrush in there when I need it. And I've got my paints. I got a clean palette out for you guys because I normally just start with colors that are already on there, but I thought you'd like to see me mix the colors, so that's what I'm gonna do here. And this is my first bullet journal, and like I've said in a previous video, I use the extra pages in the back as like a tester for different colors, so that's what I'm going to be doing here. I also forgot to mention that I always have kitchen roll on me so that I can dry my brush as I'm painting, because I don't need the brush to be soaking wet for everything, so that's why I have kitchen roll. So with this painting, the first thing I want to do is actually get a little bit of blue in the background. So I'm just going to lighten up this blue and make it a little bit softer. I'm going to add a little bit of green because under the sea would be a little bit more blue-green. It wouldn't necessarily be just blue. So as you can see, I'm adding a lot of water. This is very wet, and I'll do a test over here. So for me, that is still a bit too dark, so I'm going to rinse off the brush and add more water so that this is even lighter. And let's go again. I'm much happier with how light that is, so I am just going to start over here. I basically want a background for the bubbles. And I'm rinsing off the brush immediately and blending out the edges. When bullet journal paper is wet, it's gonna look really ugly at first, so don't be worried if it looks messy. Now I'm going to get more blue and continue this background. And then rinse, dab, and go again. This is kind of how I create my ombre effects. I literally just drag the color around. So I want more blue here surrounding the fish. And now rinse, dab, and spread that color and thin out the edges. Obviously, if you're using actual watercolor paper, this would look much nicer and you'd have a much better effect. But in my bullet journal, I just like to paint directly on the pages. So this is how I do it. I don't know if you guys can see, but the page is warping. So I am not going to touch this section again until it dries. That's the biggest thing. I just started, it's soaking wet, and now I'm not touching that area. Now I'm going to grab more paint because that ran out very quickly. That's also another thing that takes me ages when I'm doing these paintings. It's the fact that I keep running out of paint, so I have to keep mixing more paint. And yeah, this can take a while. So I just mixed more paint and I'm going to swatch it again to make sure I'm still happy with the color. And that still looks good enough for me. And I feel like drying the brush just a little bit. Now I'm gonna go back in and continue what I was doing, which is painting behind these fish. Also, when I'm doing ombre areas, I don't try to do too much in one go because, again, this is not watercolor paper and the paint will dry a lot faster. And then I won't be able to move the paint around as much. So I just do little sections at a time so that I can keep the ombre look and blend it all out. Now that does look a lot darker than the first one I did, and sometimes you're gonna have these inconsistencies, so I would just say wait until it dries before you go and even things out and fix anything. I hope by doing this video you guys can see how messy my work can be and why I have so many colors bleeding into each other. It's because when you're constantly trying to blend out on bullet journal paper, your brush can just get everywhere. Like I got a bit of blue on her face and I'm just continuing anyway. Also, the reason I'm starting with this ombre background first is because of the colors I'm going to be using. I don't know what it is about red watercolor paint, but I find it to be the messiest color to work with and it bleeds a lot and I don't want it bleeding into the background. So I'm going to try my best to do her hair last so that I don't have to worry about accidentally smearing the hair into the background while doing the background. So I think this is turning out pretty good. I'm pretty happy with how this is looking, which is kind of surprising. I've never painted like a live tutorial like this before, and it is quite tense because I don't want to mess up for you guys. But if there are any mistakes here, you guys will see it as it happens, and hopefully if I do make a mistake, I can correct it. So I know that a lot of other bullet journalers who paint in their bullet journals will tell you to like not get the paper too wet or use very little water. And that is true, but I would say it also depends on the painting that you're doing. For me, if I'm creating these ombre effects, I have to have the paper wet. And I don't know if you can tell, but it's very wrinkly and puffy now because of how wet it is. And I'm doing my best to keep it flat with these clips, and that is all I can do. I can't do anything else to hold it down. And yeah. So what I'm doing now is I'm mixing up more color again because I want to darken this bit. This is now mostly dry, and I want to go back on top with just a little more blue and then blend it out immediately. Anytime you want to do something ombre, you have to blend it out immediately on bullet journal paper. I think if you are working on watercolor paper, you can wet the paper beforehand and then go on top. I have tried wetting the paper beforehand in a bullet journal, and it doesn't help you blend anything in my opinion, and it just makes the paper extra wet for no reason. So I would say just go in with the color that you want and then try to blend it out. I don't know if you guys can see, but my paper does shred and peel sometimes. There are these little blue flakes, and I am trying to pick them off with the brush because sometimes the paper does shed when you use this much water, and there's not really anything you can do about it. You just kind of have to pick it off and hope it's not noticeable. Okay, so I might add a little bit more to the edges later, but that is enough water for me. That is wet enough. Sometimes my paintings do soak through a tiny bit, and all I can do is let them dry and just pretend that it hasn't happened. So that might be the case here, but we'll see. The next thing I want to do is go in on her tail, and the reason for that is simply because I just used blue and her tail is a blue-green. So now I'm just going to make a blue-green without having to change my paintbrush too much. So I'm mixing up some green. And I find that with watercolor, sometimes you can't get that light color you always want. You have to do a lot of thinning out the paint. So I'm gonna try my best. For me, I don't really know if that's the color I want. I want a little bit more warmth in her tail. So I'm gonna add a tiny bit of yellow. And as you can see, I'm constantly swatching my colors before I go in with them. This is what I do. I normally have my notebook on my lap, and I just add the colors onto that piece of paper and test it out. I test out every color before I paint it because it will always look different in the palette than when it's actually on paper. So I'm happy with that, but I want to do it paler to begin with. So sometimes you guys will see, I will do a very light layer of a color just like this. And the reason I do that is to try and build up shadows. So this is actually going to be a highlight first, but I'm gonna turn it into something with shadows. Now this part of Ariel's tail is actually like slightly paler, so I'm going to leave this bit right under her fin this exact color, but I am going to darken the rest. While I let that dry, I am going to take some of this color and add a bit of blue, because now I want to paint her fins, and her fins are like the palest, greenest color out there. And again, I'm just going in with this one color and I'm just painting it and pushing the water around until I'm happy with how opaque it looks. This might even be a little bit too dark, but you know what? That happens sometimes and we just have to live with it. While I'm still waiting for that to dry, I'm going to paint her bra. Okay, so for the bra, I want purple. And her bra is a lot more cool toned than this, but it's still vibrant, so I'm gonna add this blue. And that looks a little bit dark to me, so let's see. See, I think that's too dark to be Ariel's bra, so I'm gonna add more water, rinse off the brush as many times as you need. And sometimes I will just drag the paint into a separate section of the palette and just go again. That is very light, so I'm gonna just move a little bit more over. Let's just try mixing it all together now. And I'm pretty happy with that, so I'm gonna start off with this light purple. And I love to add some shadows and details to a lot of elements in my paintings, but I don't do it from the very beginning. So I'm purely just coloring her bra in one color, and then I'm going to add shadows to it later once this is already dried. I don't know if you can see, but I accidentally got a bit of purple on her skin. So with my brush being wet, I'm just going to wipe it away. And sometimes that doesn't always work. I don't know if you guys can see, but this whole section of her skin is now turning purple. So that's the first mistake happening in this video, and we're gonna have to work around it. I am just gonna let that be for now until it dries. Also, when I'm painting, a lot of the time I will just tap it with my fingers to see if it's dry, because sometimes that's the only way I can tell. The background is still slightly wet, so I'm not gonna go in on the fish yet. Her tail is dry enough for me to paint on top now, and the reason her tail is dried faster than the background is just simply because the background had a lot more water. This is why I say you have to test it with your finger to see if it's actually dry. It's not light enough for me, so we're gonna rinse the brush again. So now that I'm happy with this, I am going to paint her tail again, and I want to add a kind of highlight, so I'm going to leave a little section blank on her tail. I feel like her tail needs a bit of a highlight, so that's why I'm doing that. And so I hope you guys can see why I painted it a lighter color initially. It's so that when I painted it with this darker color, this highlight is there, and it's not pure white like the paper, it's still a greenish color to match her tail. So now I'm gonna move on to her skin tone, just because everything else is still too wet for me to work with right now. So for the skin tones, obviously each person is different. I like to start with this mustardy yellow. Everyone has a little bit of like that yellow undertone in their skin, so I start with that. And then I grab pink. These are the two colors that I use for everyone's skin tone. It doesn't matter how light or dark someone is, yellow and pink are the first things I grab. And then I just swatch immediately. For me, that's not pink enough for Ariel. I think Ariel has more pink in her skin tone, so I'm just adding more pink. And let's swatch again. Also, sometimes with these swatches, especially for the skin tone, I like to let my swatch dry so I can tell if it's the right color, because sometimes these colors look darker when they're wet. I'm kind of concerned about her skin tone right now because there is so much blue on her arms and even on her face. So I just hope that it looks okay once it's colored in. But you know, if her skin is tinted slightly blue, I can just pretend it's because she's underwater. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that skin tone swatch. I'm just gonna add more water so it's a little softer. And I will just start with her stomach. Why not? So I think that's too wet, so I'm dabbing on here and I'm picking up some of the paint and putting it on this tissue. There is definitely a lot of blue in her arms, so I am just hoping that it looks okay once we are fully done. Another thing I like to do with skin tone is add many layers to build up the opacity, and that's what I'm going to do with Ariel, but I'm going to wait for this to dry a little bit more and then I'll add another layer. So right now, with whatever's left on the brush, I am just dabbing it over her arm because her arm is blue. And I don't know what to do. Sometimes when you guys watch my videos, you might think I know exactly what I'm doing when painting, but I don't. I just do whatever I think is best in the moment, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. While I'm waiting for her skin to dry, I am gonna go over her tail with some shadowing. So I'm grabbing the green again. A little bit of blue, that's too much blue. This blue is like the most opaque thing in this entire set. I don't know why it's so opaque. So what I want to do with her tail is actually add a shadow on the other side. So that's why I'm constantly testing this green to make sure I have the one that I like. And so now I'm just going to go in and hope that I don't ruin it. I always get nervous when doing things like this because I want to create a nice crisp line and I don't want to mess it up. Okay, see, there's a little bit of like blobby paint at her waist, so I'm just going to wipe it away with a cleaner brush. This isn't perfectly clean, but I'm doing my best. Sometimes my whole paintbrush gets wet and that really messes me up. And I got a little bit of green on her stomach, so I'm just trying to fix it. I hope you guys can see that when you're painting in real time, it's a lot more chaotic than, I don't know, like my other paintings may seem. So I think I'm happy with that crisp line. Sometimes I like to blend it out and also make sections like this ombre, but for now I'm gonna leave it. I can always add more paint at the end if I wanna make that look more ombre. Her skin tone should be ready for another layer now. It wasn't that wet to begin with, so let's mix up more color. Painting over her skin again, and right now this looks a little dark, so I am worried. I hope it looks better when it's dry because Ariel is not that dark. But again, it's hard to tell when the paper is wet, so you just gotta try it out and hope it looks good. When I painted all of the Disney princesses at the beginning of my current journal, I found that the darker skinned princesses were so much easier to paint because, I don't know, it's easier to see like what tones are in their skin. But with the paler princesses, it's like, is it pink? Is it yellow? Like, it's harder to tell. So while I'm waiting for her skin to dry even more, I am going to start painting the fish because this whole background seems to be dry now. Also, now that it's dry, it's gone back to being more flat. It was a lot puffier when it was wet, but it's drier now, so that's also a good sign. Right, the fish and this were just like a very cute golden yellow. I'm dabbing off that excess water and going in. These fish do not need a lot of water. You could even do this in pen if you want, but this is a watercolor tutorial, so I'm only going to use pen if I have to. Sometimes you guys will see me going with pen, and there are reasons for that. Either it will be I don't have a watercolor that can match that. So sometimes if I want to use like a really neon pink color, I will use my Tombow dual brush pens because they have neon pink and this watercolor set does not. Otherwise, I try my best to mix up the colors myself. So again, this brush is not that wet. The main time when my brush is really wet is when I'm doing ombre things. Otherwise, I do try to dry off my brush the best that I can because otherwise I'm just adding water to the page for no reason. Also, another reason why I've decided to do the fish now is because I am happy with the background. When it was wet, I wasn't sure if I wanted to change it or blend out some more, but now that it's dry, I can see that I'm fully happy with it, so that's why I'm going in with the fish. If I were to blend the background out more now that there's fish in the way, there's a good chance I could cause bleeding and end up having a really mucky yellow smear across the background, and we don't want that. I also think Ariel's skin tone looks really good now. It looks a lot more opaque, but it doesn't look too dark like I initially feared, so that's good. And her arms are still a little bit blue tinted, but it doesn't look as bad now that I've gone in with a second layer. So I actually want to add a shadow to her skin tone, and so I'm going to mix up the same color again, but keep it a little bit darker. And even though I'm doing a shadow, I am still swatching it because I want to make sure it's the right color. See, that is so much more orange than what I actually painted her with, so I need more pink. Sometimes I will swatch a color directly over the one I initially used, and that will let me know if the paint is dark enough to create a shadow or whether it will make barely any difference or not. Sometimes I like to add a bit of gray to my shadows, so this paint is the gray, and I'm just adding a tiny bit. Okay, so I'm happy with that shadow color. And I am going to try and add shadow just to one side of her body. When you do stuff like this, it really just depends on where you're pretending that your light source is coming from. So I always do under the chin, because most of the time under your chin should be darker or have a shade, or sorry, not shade, shadow to it, and especially under the arm. If she's underwater, which she is, we know that the sun is always above her, so that's why there's a shadow under her arm here. And in her armpit over here too, there would be shadow. And I'm adding some shadow to her hand. A little bit here on her forearm, because her hand would be casting a shadow on her forearm. Now on the other hand, I am doing a shadow on the side of her pinky instead. And I'm going to add shadow to her eyelids. And I'm going to do a little bit to the top of her head. And then I'm going to rinse off my brush and blend it out, because I don't want such a harsh line on her face. This is also why I haven't done her hair yet, because when it comes to skin tone, I like to be able to blend it out if I need to. And if I had already painted her hair, her face would be red right now. I'm also going to add a little bit to her shoulder, because her hair is very wide and I think it would cast a bit of a shadow on her shoulder. Also, I don't know if you've noticed, but Ariel has red lips, and I am again waiting to do that till the very end because I don't want it bleeding into the rest of her skin tone. While we're waiting, I'm going to add some shadows to her bra. So I still have the purple color here, but I just want to add more of it. So I'm basically adding the same colors, but I'm going to darken it with some gray in a moment. Actually, I don't think I'm going to use gray because, yeah, I went in quite light the first time, so I don't need to use any gray. So for her bra, I am just going to add shadows along the lines to make it look as if the seashell is like curving out. With a lot of objects that I'm painting, I'll often do this. I just paint along the lines, and it will make it look as if there's more dimension in your paintings. So I actually want to add a little more shadow to her forehead. So I am just wetting the paint that was already here. I'm not adding any more to it. And I'm just going to paint over what I've done. And a little bit on her cheekbone too, because I think her face was just looking too flat compared to the rest of her. I think I am going to give her a little bit of blush on her cheek too, but I now need to let this dry first. While I'm waiting, I'm going to add some dimension to the fish. They're too flat, in my opinion. So I'm just going to add some orange. So in the movie, these fish are just flat yellow because this is a very 2D cartoon. So if you ever want to add dimension, just grab a slightly darker version of whatever that color is and outline it, or just paint one side of it. So I don't know if you guys can tell the difference there. It might not be that easy to tell when the camera is so far away, but in person it looks a lot better just by adding this extra orange color. It makes it look as if you put more effort in, even though it's like the quickest, tiniest thing. So now I do want to add some blush to her face, so I'm taking some pink and I am really watering it down. Pink is like also another struggle for me with watercolor because oftentimes I want like the lightest, cutest pink shade and it's very difficult to achieve. So I am dabbing off a lot of that water. There is a lot of water in this pink section, and I'm hoping that it won't look too pink on her. I'm actually going to add a bit of orange to it. It's like too red pink, I think, for her cheeks. So I'm just going to paint it. And now I am terrified. I might keep it looking that harsh actually. No, that looks ridiculous. Okay, so I changed my mind a lot and I get nervous. So now I'm going to soften that and just blend it around. Again, this is why I have not painted her lips or her hair yet. So as you guys can tell, I am not trying to make this look identical to the cartoon. In the cartoon, there is no extra shadowing, there's no highlight. Her bra, it doesn't have 2 shades of purple on it, but I'm kind of just using some artistic liberty, as people say, and I'm just making this look however I want it to look. I'm actually pretty happy with her skin tone, so I am going to start the hair now, which is terrifying for me. So we're going to start off with this pinkish red. Her hair is not very pink at all. If you've watched The Little Mermaid, the series, they made her hair so pink, but in the movie it's more of like a darker brick red. See, I don't want to make it too bright, so I am going to add some black. I don't want to add gray because I don't want to reduce the vibrancy in the color, so I'm adding black to make it darker. I always find red the most difficult color to work with, so just do your best when you're using red. I don't know what it is. It's quite intimidating. I think I'm happy with this red, and then I'm going to add some shadows to it. So let's start off on one side. I hate going in with red paint. It literally terrifies me. I also hate wearing red. Like, is having a phobia of a color a thing? Let me guys know if you know about that, because I literally hate the color red. It like, I don't hate it, but it just like scares me. You will hardly ever see me wear red. I don't own anything red. I used to when I was younger, but then I don't know, red literally scares me. And now there's red on her face, so I'm gonna have to try and watch that. Also, I don't know if you guys can see, but I am painting over the same section over and over again to try and get the smoothest, most opaque application of the red. See, so here it's lighter and you can see streaks, but if I go over again immediately after, it smooths it out. And I can do that because this brush is not insanely wet. This is like basically something you're gonna have to learn how to practice over time. In the beginning, if you guys watch my earlier watercolor videos from this year, I was a mess and not everything was always even. Things were blotchy. Even now, things will still be blotchy for me. So just try your best. It's hard to know how wet your brush is, if it's wet enough, if it's got too much water in it. It's just gonna take practice for you to be able to tell. And I would say try your best not to be so afraid of practicing. It doesn't matter if you mess up a painting and it doesn't look your greatest. You know, a lot of the times we fear painting because we're so afraid of it looking bad. And most professional artists out there had terrible paintings to begin with. So just accept if your painting isn't what you wanted it to be initially, you'll get there eventually, promise you. So that is actually one of the smoothest applications I've ever had with red, so I'm very happy about that. I want to try and fix the red that is on her forehead. So when I do that, I completely rinse off my brush. And this is why it's also good to have a tissue, because you can see if there's any color left in the brush. And then I wet the tip of it, and I'm going to try and blur those red edges. Sometimes this doesn't always work, sometimes it does, it just depends. Now I need to let that dry to see if it really worked or not. So I personally think her tail still just looks a little too light for my taste, so I'm just re-wetting the color that was already here. And then I swatch it. I want to have a look. This is nice and light. A lot of the times when I am darkening up a color that's already here, I don't want to layer over it with a much darker color because this already has paint on it. So I'm just painting over it with what I have, and we'll let it dry and we'll see what it looks like. I am much happier with the color of her tail now. It is more opaque than it was before, but it's not too much darker either. One thing I do want to do now is reinforce that shadow that was on her tail because it's not as dark as it was before in terms of contrast. I'm actually going to add a little bit of this to the other side of her, but just the tiniest bit. See, I did a little bit at the top, and I'm going to do a little bit over here too. And if you're wondering about how to know like where you want to put placement of shadows, you just have to think about where the light source is coming from and how you want it to look. So now that her hair is dry, I'm gonna go in with some more details. So I have no idea what I'm doing with her hair. I am just going to try and create some shadows in a way that I like it. So I'm starting off underneath again. And I'm actually going to follow the lines that are here. So this is what I'll do a lot of the time when I'm unsure. I literally just paint a shadow along the lines. And I feel like that looks pretty cool, so I'm gonna do it everywhere. I want to add more shadows, so I'm going to wet my brush and just basically water down that color that I was using. And I want to do single stroke shadows, so I'm just going to do that, and a little bit on this side too. See, I really like that. That added a bit more dimension, and I'm just going to do a little bit under here too. Now I'm rinsing off my brush because I just want to blend out this line a little bit. Another thing I will also say about watercolor painting on bullet journal paper is the bullet journal matters. So for most of this year, I have just used Archer and Olive, and I really love their paper. And my recent journal is Notebook Therapy, and I really love their paper too, but it doesn't hold up with ombreing as well. And now that I'm using this Archer and Olive paper again, I can see that painting in an ombre style is so much easier on Archer and olive paper, and I don't know why that is. So just be wary of that. I'm sure some people don't have any problem with the paper and maybe it's just me, but that is what I've experienced. So I don't know if you guys can see, I think I added too much water to this tip of her hair and now it's looking kind of blotchy. So I'm gonna try and let that dry and see if I can fix it. While I'm waiting, it seems like I got more red on her face again. So I'm gonna try and blend that out with a clean wet brush. See, that kind of worked. So sometimes you just have to try your best and hope the paint doesn't bleed everywhere. So now that that tip of her hair is kind of dry, I just want to push around the paint with this slightly damp brush if I can. So I just kind of like blurred it out and dabbed at it, and I think that has helped. Although now I think I'm starting to lift off some of the other paint. So like I said, all these accidents can happen while you're painting, and you just gotta do your best. The only reason I know to do these things is because these are mistakes I make often, and I just go over it as many times until it looks how I want it to look. While I'm waiting for all of that to dry, I really want to add some highlight to her fins, and I'm just gonna use a white gel pen for that. So I'm basically following along the line. In the movie, her fins do not have black outlines like this. They are completely white, like they're outlined in white. But since this is white journal paper, her fins would basically look invisible if I tried to do that. So I am just going to add highlights to one edge of the black lines. So now that the hair has dried more, I can see that that is still blotchy. So again, I am not wetting this brush. However wet it is just what I'm using, and I'm just picking up more pigment and I'm painting it over that little bit. And so now we're gonna let it dry again and see if it still looks as bad as it was. So in the process of all this painting, sometimes the lines get kind of blurred out, like her eyebrow here is like almost disappearing. So I'm just gonna go back in with my pen and fix it up. So while I'm waiting for more of that to dry, I am now going to do the bubbles in the white pen. I don't know if you guys could see them initially, but they are there. And the reason I'm doing them in white is simply because I didn't want a bunch of black lines everywhere when Ariel is meant to be the focus of this piece. So we're using a white gel pen. So this part can be very time consuming, but I wanted you guys to see some of it in real time. And this is why my setups can take me sometimes an entire week to film, because little things like this can take forever. So now I am gonna paint her lips red too. Also, I don't know if you guys can see, look how much this piece of paper in this journal is curling because it's not clipped down. These clips hold everything in place, whereas this is completely curving everywhere. So before I unclip it, sometimes I just check to see if it's dry, or sometimes I go away for a few hours and come back. But this is completely dry, so now I'm going to unclip. And this is what it looks like at the back. It is still wrinkly, but the clips definitely helped to keep it in place. And so because this is going to one of you guys, I am going to just sign it quickly. So that is it. That is the end of this video. Leave a fish emoji down below if you are still here. And I hope you guys liked this video. Definitely click the link and go to my eBay if this is something you wish to purchase from me. I've never sold one of my paintings before, and I would love for you guys to be one of the first. So definitely check out the link. And if you have any more questions about painting on bullet journal paper, leave them down below too. I will answer them as best as I can. And I do plan on doing more tutorials in the future and listing more of my stuff on eBay for you guys to have. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.